How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, good.
I'm so happy to have you here with me today.
I'm so excited to be here.
Yay! So, we met a couple years ago in Washington, D.C.
Yes.
How quickly those years have flown by.
I know. In some ways, it seems like yesterday. In some ways, I have a colleague who always says this week has been a long year. And yes, it seems like we've had a succession of those.
I feel like it's January 74th.
Yeah, it does feel like January 74th. I'm going to start
posted that the other day and I was like, yes, it's so much.
Totally.
Well, I'm super excited that you're here today. I would love it if you would introduce yourself and tell my audience a little bit about who you are and how you came to do your work.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Cokley. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am the founding director of a project called the Disability Justice Initiative, which is housed at the Center for American Progress here in Washington, D.C. And I have worked in the disability community as a whole. I was pretty much raised in it. My dad ran a Center for Independent Living, and my mom ran a disabled student center at a community college. And like them, I'm a little person. And so I grew up in the Bay Area in the early 1980s with parents who were activists and really focused on like intersectional advocacy, like working at the nexus of racism, sexism, ableism in the Bay Area at the height of the AIDS crisis. And which is a time really unlike many others. And learn from their example that the only way our movements survive is by working together and supporting each other, and have really made that a key focus of my work over the last 20 years or so now.
That's incredible. It's so interesting to be connected to people who remember the AIDS crisis, because so few people, I remember the first person I lost to AIDS.
Yeah.
And so few people are around to share that experience. And it's the thing that I think as a younger person, really started to drive my advocacy. And I think that it's really such an important foundational moment in our history.
Yeah, I mean, for me growing up, I remember I used to have ice skating on Saturdays. I used to go to the shopping mall and take ice skating lessons. Nice. And I remember having to miss skating lessons to go to funerals for either students of my mom's or people who were clients at the center my dad worked at. And as a little kid at 5 or 6, being really frustrated and frankly pissed because I wanted to go ice skating.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to, in the Bay Area, a majority of the cemeteries are all up in this suburb of San Francisco called Colma, yep, which is where they moved them, after the earthquake. And I remember thinking we were going to the mall and then turning and going north instead and being like, wait, where are we going? And my parents being like, we have to go to Colma. We have to go to a funeral today. And being like, I want to go ice skating. And my parents being very clear and talking to me about the fact that for a lot of our friends, they were buried with no loved ones present. Yeah. Because the stigma of AIDS was still so real and so pervasive that for many, people were crowdfunding headstones before there was crowdfunding, before that was a thing. And my parents were just really clear about the fact that nobody deserved to go through that alone, and that everyone had dignity, and that nobody deserved to be buried without people there to remember them. And that being really just having that being sort of an embedded piece of my leadership DNA coming from my parents.
Yeah. Would you say that that's one of the things that drives you to continue your work in the face of obstacles? Because you run into obstacles all the time in your work. So would that be one of the things or what are other things that drive you to continue your work in the face of obstacles?
I think that's definitely a piece of it. The other piece is, frankly, I really enjoy the strategy. I really enjoy sitting and thinking about what's the right coalition mix, what's the right message, who's the right person to deliver that message. In what way? What is our activism around an issue going to look like? And probably one of my favorite things is really deciding, thinking through, who's not at the table that would be a really unique player that would give this alliance a different nuance or give it a different sort of flavor, that might make us successful in a way that we weren't previously.
Oh, I love that so much. So what I asked a bunch of my followers what they would want to know from all of you before I started this interview series. And one of them brought up imposter syndrome. And they wanted to know how you fight imposter syndrome and feeling inadequate about your skills, education, or ideas.
I have a core group of women friends that are all disabled women. And it's predominantly, it's made up of 4 disabled women that I worked with in the Obama White House. And we each have different skill sets. We each have different personalities. We each have different disabilities. And they are my brain trust. And they're the folks that I can go to and be like, hey, like, am I really, like, pinch me? Like, do I deserve to be in this space? Do I deserve to be in this room? Like, and they're the quickest sounding board to be like, yes, you're where you're supposed to be. You know, everything we've been through has prepared us for this moment. You know, the other thing, honestly, is my kids. I'm very open with my kids when I'm feeling insecure. Because I think it's really important for them to see my own thought process.
Yes.
Especially with my son who's 9 and is some days ridiculously confident. And then other days really struggle because 9 is the age where he's a little person too. And so his friends have hit a growth spurt that he's not going to hit the same way. And so he's really struggling physically and like keeping up with his friends. And so for me, it's been really important for me to talk to him about how I feel sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, and he'll say to me like, Mommy, are you ever nervous about like talking to this senator? Or Mommy, are you ever, you know, Mommy, are you nervous about if we don't win the White House back, like, and things like that. And like just taking the time to actually like be really honest and authentic in those conversations. Say, yeah, you know, Mommy does get nervous. Mommy does get freaked out. Mommy picks a theme song every year that I listen to.
What's your theme song this year?
I actually haven't found it yet, which is really struggling. It's really frustrating. So like the first year I did it, and I still go back to it all the time, is Elton John's I'm Still Standing. It's impossible not to feel like a badass when you listen to that song.
True.
Andre Day's Rise Up,
oh, I love that song.
Philadelphia Pride remix specifically.
Ooh, yes.
Frank Turner's The Next Storm, which is another one that I had a couple years ago, and I haven't found my one for this year yet. So I'm still waiting to figure out what it is. It'll like when it comes to me, I'll know it. And then what I'll do is I'll just make a point of when I'm feeling that struggle, when I'm feeling like I'm not walking in with my ness, like to like hit play and to listen to it in the elevator before I give a speech, or, you know, whatever I need to do to sort of, you know, reconfigure my brain into the right mindset. But I find music actually very helpful in that.
I love that so much because I think music becomes so much a part of our work, especially if we are kind of blazing our own trail and doing this work in taking action and advocacy for ourselves. And I love that you are honest with your kids about feeling inadequate or feeling like you don't know what's going to happen next or have all the answers, because I have found that being vulnerable with my kids is the way that I can really start to feel empowered. And you know, if I saw myself the way my kids see me, I think my whole life would be totally different. My teenager told me she wished that she had even a little bit of the grace that I have, and I was like, who are you talking about right now? Like, grace? What?
It is always
blew my mind.
It is always funny to see what they pick up on. Like, what are the things that that they think about in terms of like their, you know, in terms of the work that you do, the circles that you inhabit. You know, I had to explain to my son one time when he was probably like 4 or 3. He was mad that I was picking him up early from school because we had a goodbye party to go to at the White House for a friend of mine. And he was like, I have to go to the White House again?
Oh my God.
And like 3 of his friends were like, Jackson, you're going to the White House? And he was like, yeah, but I'm not going to see the president. And it's just like this thing. And people are going to give speeches. And and I remember like getting in the car. I was like, do you understand like how privileged you are? Like how special it is that like we can just roll in and out of the White House on a regular basis. Like the Secret Service have candy for you behind the desk and they know your name. Like this is not a thing that most kids have. And for them, I mean, being kids from marginalized communities, like actually having like the real conversation about like, no, Jackson, you running around the hallways of the White House is a big deal.
Yeah.
You know, most kids,
Wow.
most biracial disabled kids don't have that. And we need to think about how we leverage what we have in those sorts of spaces. Like I would say to him, because he would be like, why are we going here again? Or, oh, we're going to the Easter egg roll or whatever. And then on Sunday mornings, I would give tours of the White House. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, specifically to families with kids with disabilities, because I'm like, this is your house. You need to see people like you here. And I remember my son being like, why do you have to get up early on Sunday morning? Why can't you sleep in? And I was like, no, I'm taking kids like us to see the White House because it matters and it's special.
Yeah.
You know, and just having
and those kids no longer have access to that anymore.
Nobody does, but
nobody does. No, but that's another story.
We'll get it back eventually.
Yeah, eventually. Do you have one or more definable moments in your journey, or have you always been this way? Like, did you just like pop out like all scrappy? Like what are those moments in your journey that have brought you to the place where you are so brave? And you know, many people would call you brave in your outspokenness. I think it for you and I, it just comes naturally to us now. But are there moments along your way where you were like, I can't stay silent about this anymore?
I had, when I was a sophomore in high school, a really good friend of mine. Actually, when I was in junior high, this happened to him. He passed away when I was in high school. But when I was in junior high school, I had a really good friend who was in elementary school who was also a little person. And he didn't come home from school one day. And his parents thought he went to Boy Scouts because he had scouts after school and didn't think anything of it. Dinner time came and went. He still wasn't home, so they called the scoutmaster. The scoutmaster told them that he wasn't at scouts. They, reached out, called the emergency number for the school. The school called them back and said, oh, he wasn't in class after lunch. So nobody noticed Vaughn was missing. And his parents sent his older brother and sister out to look for him and started calling around to see maybe like what he was always he was always a trickster. He was very much a low-key like character as a little kid. And so they were like, maybe Vaughn's like playing a joke on us or something. They wouldn't have put it past him. They found him in the dumpster of his school. And some kids had picked him up and thrown him in the dumpster and thrown the lid on. And he was too short to be able to get the lid off.
Oh.
And the next day when he went, so they found him, they brought him home. He told them what happened. The next day when he went to school, he had one of those like baseball bats that you get at like a stadium, like the little T-bats, in his backpack. And he was expelled for harboring a weapon.
Oh, Jesus.
And so my mom got a phone call from Vaughn's parents, and we went out and for my mom to help mediate this conversation between Vaughn's family and the school. Mm-hmm. And I grew up with the exact opposite school experience. I'm still like, my principal comments on my Facebook page all the time, my elementary school principal. Mm-hmm. And so to see somebody with the same disability I had, being treated so hardly, and the school just being like, well, that's the way of the world, just blew my mind. And so that was a moment. And realizing that like my experience was not the norm and should be. The second piece was probably, I'm gonna grab a coffee. When one of my dream jobs came up, and I beat a mentor of mine for it.
Woo!
And he was not happy about it. Mm-hmm. And he proceeded in, if I'm going to be really real, like making my life hell for a long time. Mm-hmm. And surviving that. Mm-hmm. Coming through that on the other side. Mm-hmm. And him telling me that I would never be anything. I would continue to fail. People would always believe that I was not meant for that job. And like when I hit like the 2 or 3 year mark in that job, somebody had said to me, someone's like, do you remember how scared you were? How you were like, I'm not going to be able to do it as good as he did. He was totally right. Like all of those fears are like, you hit my husband. It was actually my husband who said, he's like, you hit year 3.
Mm-hmm.
And it really hitting me that I was able to do it.
Yeah.
And that being a real moment. And like, I still run into that person frequently. Yeah. And that was like 2 jobs ago. And I'm still here. Like, and I know people that he's driven out of the field. Mm-hmm. And it's still one of those things that I'm always like, yeah, I mean, it's at Elton John. I'm still standing. Like, I am still here. You tried everything. And I am a woman. I am younger than you. I have less education than you, but I am a hell of a lot better than you.
Yeah.
And that for me was a real moment where it was like, no, like I passed the test. Mm-hmm. And I persevered. I persisted.
Yes.
So.
Indeed. I think it's so interesting to think about these definable moments, like these moments in our journey that, because for me, it was in high school and I discovered Ms. Magazine and I was like, you know, white kid in Park City, Utah with like 400 people in my high school. And all of a sudden I'm like, I have to protest these things. Like, this is not right.
Yeah.
So many levels. And so I was doing my one woman protest in high school.
That's awesome.
And but it's like those little moments. And I think for a lot of us that are in the public eye and are doing this work all the time, people look at us and think that we haven't had to surmount anything to get this space, which I think is fascinating. And you know, it's a constant we have to talk to ourselves all the time about what do we do next and how do we stay in this game and how do we keep going, because it is hard work. So what are like 3 specific intangible habits or techniques that you use to counter that negative self-talk in your head that's like, why are you even doing this, you fool? Like, what are some like 3 things you do?
3 things I do. I mean, I definitely talk to my circle of women friends regularly. And they're a great echo chamber. I make a point of having at least one fun meeting a week. Mm-hmm. Like, it doesn't have to be on something I'm currently working on. It can be with a friend of mine who's in town that I haven't seen in a while. It really is just a touch point for creativity. Like, you know, I'll meet someone at a meeting and be like, we should really hang out. Mm-hmm. Let's actually schedule time and commit to it. Mm-hmm. And just like sit in a room or sit over a glass of wine or grab a whiteboard and just throw shit on the wall and see what sticks. Mm-hmm. That to me, and a lot of times for me, that specifically is important to have with people outside of my movement. Mm-hmm. People outside of the disability space. So I might, you know, engage with folks in the reproductive justice side or engage with folks in the broader civil rights movement, or, you know, my colleagues that are working on fighting the Muslim ban and things like that. Like, just so I'm getting a different read on things. Yeah. And also thinking about how I can continue to be a really good ally. I'm trying to think of a third one. You know, I think for me, something like I'm not like artistically creative. Like, I'm not a knitter. I'm not a painter. I can't draw for shit. And my mom could do all of those things. Oh. But I like to build Lego sets. And so that for me is like when I just need quiet time to be in my brain and focusing on something. I like to build like specifically like Lego Star Wars sets. I have a whole bunch.
I so appreciate this about you on so many levels.
Like, it is like I'm at the point where I've maxed out space in my house. And so I have like a giant moving box in my storage unit that's like full of, I probably have about 15 or 20 sets that it just kills me because I just want to sit and build and I just haven't had the time. But that's actually one of my priorities for this next year is to figure out space here or at my office that I can start building that up again, because it's just really like having something that has a fixed beginning and a fixed endpoint. So I feel like I've accomplished something. Yeah. and I'm keeping my hands busy, and at the same time I'm not having to pour a lot of emotional labor into it, for me is really recharging.
That's awesome. I feel that way about 1,000-piece puzzles.
That's awesome.
When I was getting my PhD, I did a puzzle at the end of every semester because like
that's so cool.
The only way I could turn my brain off.
Oh, totally.
And get it to just stop.
Yep. Yeah. When my mom died, I picked up the Lego habit, and because it was cheaper than therapy. And I was like, I couldn't afford therapy at the time, but I was like, I just need to sit and do something, turn off my brain, and do something that's productive, but not labor intensive.
Yeah, that's genius. So good. So good. What is the most misunderstood myth of the word feminism?
All of it. You know, I mean, and it's funny hearing you mention Ms. Magazine, because my mom had a subscription growing up, and so I read it all the time. And I have one of my dearest friends is the CEO of the Ms. Foundation. And so I spent a lot of time in spaces around Ms's work. And I think one of the coolest things they ever did was I got to be part of a PSA project they did about what is feminism, like the new definition of feminism. And I really think it's just that it's that same old, like, tried and true, like, white middle it's a place for like white middle class, straight, cis hetero women. And the fact that, like, it can be so many more different things to so many more different people. And for me, I mean, I wrote a paper in college about my senior thesis was, can I be a disabled feminist? Going back to the old traditional norms of feminism, which are really entrenched in ableism.
Yeah.
And like, I can't do the same thing that like a or a non-disabled, like, straight male can do. And that's reality. And that can't be my bar. My bar has to be different.
Yeah, I just joined a group, and they have like this rule that at the meetups people can't sit down, so that they're mingling all the time. And I was like, that's the most ableist thing ever. Like, that was, my head was like, that's not okay. And so I just was like, that's on my list of things to like say today, because they did a great job in saying we shouldn't use the word tribe anymore. And I'm like, yay. Good, awesome, fantastic. But I'm going to call him on the people can't sit down thing, because that's such an ableist way of thinking, but we don't think about it that way. And for me, feminism is so complicated in so many ways. And that's why I want to ask this question of everyone. So you're the first interview in this series, and I'm interviewing a bunch of people, and I really wanted to hear everybody's answer to this question, because we have so many myths about feminism and what it is. And I love that you brought it up as a white, cis, heteronormative, ableist.
And for me, it comes from like, I joke that like I inherited a phenomenal group of pseudo sister-in-laws from my husband, who went to Howard University, with folks like Dr. Brittany Cooper, who writes about crunk feminism, and Aisha Moody Mills, who's a pundit, and all of these phenomenal folks, phenomenal women that I learned from daily. And it really is one of those things where it's like, I bet we would each have a different fundamental definition of what feminism is, and that's part of what makes it important, is like the fact that it can mean so many different things, and at the same time, for a lot of us, it means casting off the old traditional meanings.
It really does.
Finding something that works for us in that space.
That's awesome. So I have 3 questions that are just for you.
Totally.
So the first question is, what is the most important thing people need to know about disabilities in America in 2020?
We exist in 1/3 of households, so chances are if you turn around, there we are. And if you don't see us, we're likely you. I think we continue to think about disability as this external thing and not realize that it's present in all parts of our life on a daily basis. And if you do movement work specifically, nobody comes to movement work because your life is perfect. We come to movement work because of trauma, whether it's physical, whether it's mental, whether it's emotional. whether it's societal, some sort of trauma that we've experienced. And oftentimes we forget that movement work can also be traumatizing. And so as we think about this, like, and trauma is a disability.
Yes.
And so disability is present in all of our movement spaces, whether or not we call it out, whether or not we openly welcome it into the space. One of the things that I do in my workshops now is I welcome, and I did this on Capitol Hill 2 weeks ago, was, I said, I welcome all of you to the space for this hearing today, for this briefing. And I want to specifically call in the roughly 25% of you that are people with disabilities. Whether or not you're out, we welcome you wherever you are on your journey. And when you're ready to join the community, we're here to welcome you.
Wow.
And it's fundamentally shifted our reception at things, where literally afterwards I'll have at least 3 or 4 folks come up to me and be like, hey, I have Crohn's, does that count? Or hey, I live with depression, I've never considered it a disability, does it count? And really thinking about how we structure spaces in such a way to build a big tent.
So good. My second question is, do you have a gratitude practice? And if you do, what is it?
I don't. I really make a point, and it's funny, something actually I want to do this year. I have a colleague who I shared an office with for 2 years at the White House, and we used to joke that we were like the worst Catholics in the White House. And we were just bad Catholics in general. But I used to watch him leg down a priest for abstentions in advance of Lent every year. And what he did during Lent, because he's like, I'm too much of an Irishman, I can't give anything up.
Yeah.
Is he would write a gratitude letter to somebody different every day for 40 days.
Ooh, I love that.
And it was really cool. And it's something that, like, I got one from him a few years ago and I totally forgot about this, and I get this letter in my mailbox from Michael O'Neill and I open it up and I'm like, oh, it's April. I got one of his letters. I really believe in, like, acknowledging your gratitude the minute you feel it, even if it's something little. Even if, I was talking to some colleagues today about how somebody asked me what the greatest gift was that I've gotten from somebody that was not my husband. And I talked about how a really good friend of mine built my Wikipedia page. And it sounds silly.
That's a great gift.
Right? But it has had such an impact on me professionally.
Really?
Yeah. Like, I walk in places and people know who I am because they Google me and the first thing that comes up is a Wikipedia page. And it was like, and I remember him being like, hey, I hope you don't mind, for your birthday, I built you a Wikipedia page. And it was someone that I had worked with professionally, and we had some personal crossover. Our families had become close, and we're still good friends today. But it was like such a thoughtful gift.
Yeah.
And at the time that I was leaving the Obama administration, I was trying to figure out what I was doing next. And the number of people I had when I was off-ramping one job and trying to figure out what I was going to do next, that reached out to me and knew who I was because of that.
Wow.
Was really huge. And it was just like such a thoughtful thing.
That is. The third thing, my third question is, what is your niggling feeling, that feeling telling you about what's next?
My niggling feeling right now is just, I don't know, I've been thinking about this a lot because I've been feeling it. Like, it's and it's hard to differentiate. Living in DC, it's hard to differentiate between paranoia and reality in this city right now.
Oh my God, I can't even imagine the energy there.
It's so weird. The city has felt weird in a way, grounded in, like, both passive and very blatant, like, hostility since this administration. Like, having been here through the George W.'s years, like, it's very different.
Yeah.
I feel like there's such a tremendous opportunity to come together and hold the line across movement spaces. Like, I was talking to somebody earlier today about the struggle between the disabled people and caregivers,
Mm-hmm.
and the fight for solidarity across both those spaces, that while disabled people have a fundamental right to live in the community with all the supports and services that they need to be able to do that and thrive.
Sure.
We also can't ignore the fact that caregivers need to make a living wage, need to have professional development, need to have retirement and services and supports too.
Mm-hmm.
And how traditionally that's always been a wedge issue.
Yeah.
And how we have to really move from, I think the niggle feeling is moving from acting off of a attitude of scarcity
Mm-hmm.
to an attitude of abundance.
Mm.
And how can we philosophically move our communities? And I was talking to a colleague of mine that works on the caregiver space, and we were both just like, how can we pull our sides together in a conversation grounded in abundance, instead of scarcity, and continue to hold the line in this mentality that like no one deserves to live without, no one deserves to be poor, and the only way we'll get through this is together.
Yeah, I love that so much. I feel like one of my favorite human beings on the planet posted something about how religion is shit, in response to that awful priest who said that the abortion and pedophilia thing.
Yeah.
So for those of you that don't know, this priest said that abortion is worse than pedophilia, and someone said religion is shit. And I said, the priest is shit.
Yeah.
Religion is not shit.
No.
And he really started pushing back at me. And it's that this all or nothing thinking and unwillingness. And of course, he made a good point. He's like, religion has been used as a homophobic, heteronormative, white, empire Christianity is a problem. And I'm like, I'm not denying that.
Wow.
But all these blanket statements where there's no room for conversation or questioning or dialogue keeps it so we can't hold that tension that you're talking about between caregivers and people with disabilities, right?
Yeah.
We can't hold that line, that tension. It's like no one wants us to hold the tension. They want everything to be absolute. And I think that I love that you are really pushing that boundary, because I think that it's so critical to us moving forward across movement spaces. Like, we cannot deny that religion is a critical part of our lives for many of us, right? Yeah. You just talked about being a bad Catholic. Like, I just barely found Christianity like 3 years ago. And I like want this tension of being like super like evangelizing and like just like holding this like, but everybody needs to know how good this feels, like there's all these gray areas. And if we aren't willing to just talk to each other across these lines, and we keep holding this hard black or white, all or nothing thinking, I really just think it's going to destroy where we could go as movement makers and people who are walking all of these different spaces.
Well, so I have a friend who challenged all of us. My friend Cornell Brooks, who's the former head of the NAACP and is a professor at the intersection of law and religion at Harvard. And he issued a Facebook challenge to read a book of Dr. King's that's not Letters from a Birmingham Jail. That's not the I Have a Dream speech. And so I'm reading, I picked something up, and so I'm like starting to read it. And
what is it?
I picked From Chaos to Coalition, I think it's called. Downstairs. I haven't started it yet.
Okay.
But one of the things that I'm really like, the reason I picked it up is because really like, how do we examine that nuance? Like, how do we tease apart those tough issues?
Yeah.
How do we go from moving, how do we go from using faith as a sword to using it as a shield? Like, and really thinking about our collective faith in humanity and in each other. In times like this, how do we give each other the benefit of the doubt?
Yeah.
Actually, that was the conversation we had with our 9-year-old last night, was about like teaching him to give his parents the benefit of the doubt, and how do we do that as movement leaders in a lot of these spaces?
Yeah. Jen Hatmaker just finished up a really good series. I don't know if you ever listen to her podcast, but she just did a really great series about faith and activism in 2020. And it is, so her podcast is called For the Love.
Ooh, I'll have to check it out. I'm writing it down.
Oh, if you have not listened, it is so good. But the interviews that she did in particular on this most recent podcast series about Christianity and activism and politics were just, it was glorious. It was really lovely.
I mean, these are the conversations we need to be having, you know, as people who proclaim themselves as part of the Christian faith, as, you know, as Protestants, as bad Catholics, as like across the board. I mean, it really is beyond time.
Yeah, I think you're right. Is there anything else you would like to tell people about how to find the work that you're doing?
You can find me on Twitter at Rebecca Cokley. And yeah, I mean, we have, I'm based at the Center for American Progress, so you can look up americanprogress.org. You can reach out to us via there. People reach out to us all the time. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here. Hold on the line for a little bit and I'm going to end the live stream. So thank you everyone for being with us today. Make sure you share this on all your social medias. And if you want to come play with me over on Twitter, you can come and follow me at birdgirl1001. Thanks again, Rebecca.
Thank you.